Hello again, and welcome to another in our autumn series of Invisible Histories talks. As I always say, our talks are free, but we do, of course, welcome our donations, and there's a donate button on our website. Amy Todd is here today to speak to us about the Peckham Publishing Project, one of the many groups that made up the International Federation of Worker Writers and Community Publishers in the 1980s. The library contains a lot of material from the Federation, which everyone is welcome to come and browse. Amy, over to you, and as you share your screen, press that sound recording button.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. You can see that okay?
Yeah, great,
okay.
Thank you.
Lovely. 1 second. Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. I am a kind of public engagement manager for a site in Hackney. So usually my job is doing what Lynette does today and is setting up other speakers, and I rarely get to speak myself. So thank you very much for the opportunity. So I'm going to be talking about the Peckham Publishing Project. So I have done this research because I did my master's at Birkbeck in public history quite recently, and when I had to decide what I wanted to do for my dissertation, I had no idea. The last time I studied history, I was 12 at school. I thought, oh gosh, everyone else seems to have a kind of like period or something that they have a passion for, and I wasn't sure. And then I managed to find the work of the Peckham Publishing Project and the wider work of the Federation, and from then on I was hooked. So I will be talking a little bit about what it felt like for me as a northern working class person to come across this material, how I ended up coming across it, why I liked it so much in terms of the content that the Peckham Publishing Project produced, but also the way that they worked, how they created this, the kind of people that were involved, how it worked in the local area and kind of supported local groups and people. Then I guess why it's important, why do I think that that's relevant to today, and what it could maybe benefit conversations about kind of working class identity, cultural production, things like that. And then I'll finish off with kind of plans for the future that I'm, thinking or dreaming about, and then we'll go to some questions. And it'd be great if people want to ask any questions, or if you yourself have kind of knowledge of any of these things, because I'm still actively researching. So I came across this material because at the time I worked at Senate House Library on an engagement project. It was Layers of London. I don't know if you know it, but it was a mapping project, and I had a community engagement role. But we were based at Senate House Library, and I was in the trade union, the IWGB, and oh, that's my doorbell. Apologies. Now you'll see my partner walk past sneakily trying to get the post. The librarian, Layla, said, Amy, have you seen this collection in Senate House Library, the Ron Heisler collection? And I said no, and she showed me it, and it's all this fantastic collection of left-wing paper ephemera, really, from punk gigs to, as you can see here, things about the Spanish Civil War, to all sorts of things like feminist consciousness-raising groups in Leeds and Goole, and it's a really amazing collection. And in this collection, they had the work of the Peckham Publishing Project, as well as some other wider things in the Federation. And I thought, that's what I want to do my dissertation on. So I came across this material because of the trade union that I was in, and because of the kind of working class friendships and colleagues. And this thread of working classness through the research seems to go through the whole of the kind of research process. And I live in Peckham, and so in some kind of downtime, I went to the South London Gallery, which is down the road on the way to Camberwell, opposite Camberwell School of Art. And it's a really fantastic gallery, and they have lots of great exhibitions, particularly in their little archive section. So they had an exhibition about the work of the Peckham Publishing Project. The Peckham Publishing Project was based in a building called the Bookplace on Peckham High Street, which is that picture you can see there in that pink image. And I thought, oh, well, this is too good to be true. There's all this information here about Peckham Publishing Project, and this is brilliant. And I got to see, really for the first time, the material that they published, and I flicked through and kind of saw the kind of breadth of the work that they did there. And there was one particular publication that was written by two dinner ladies that lived in Peckham. And the Bookplace not only published this kind of work, and I'll go into later the kind of work that they also did, but they also did free adult education classes. At the time, there was that big literacy drive. So getting kind of working class and local people to be able to read and write English. And the Bookplace used that as a publishing platform so that other adults that were learning to read and write didn't have to use children's literature to be able to do that, but could use the experiences of other people themselves talking about adult content and material, but in quite easy to read language whilst they were learning. So the two dinner ladies had come together and written this book about their experience, their lived experience as dinner ladies in Peckham. And each page had quite one word sentence on: some kids eat chips, some kids eat beans, some kids are nice, some kids are horrible. And the last line was, but we love them all. And I shed a little tear and thought, I can't not do something about this kind of work. It's incredible, and I don't know of anyone who's really working on it. People have done lots of work on Centerprise in Hackney, which was a very similar kind of site, but I don't really know anyone doing much about this Peckham stuff, apart from this wonderful exhibition at South London Gallery. So I then kind of realised that the Peckham Publishing Project was part of a much wider umbrella organisation, which is the Federation of Worker Writers and Community Publishers. And as Lynette said, their kind of work is scattered everywhere. There's some at the Working Class Movement Library, there's some at the Trade Union Congress Library, which is at London Metropolitan University. The archivist there, Jeff Howarth, is very enthusiastic about the collection there. And there's also some that have been digitised online by Jessica Pausek, who's at Syracuse University. So there are some digitised online. Sometimes you find them online, selling on eBay randomly and things like that. But they seem to be a bit kind of scattered everywhere. Now, as you can see in the image, the kind of breadth of what they published was absolutely massive. So seeing kind of books that were published, all over the UK, from groups with learning difficulties to groups with adult education kind of groups, people sharing their kind of migration stories. You have lots of women's writing, mums writing, feminist writing. It's massive. And I think what really drew me to it was the intersectionality of what they meant by working class, and seeing all of these different things be kind of developed under the umbrella of working class. So the way that they kind of defined working classness was this quote at the bottom here: an understanding of a collective identity open to revision and expansion, a working class identity without guarantees, which I really liked because it gives room to debate. And they did debate. They had AGMs every year, and there's stories of all sorts of upsets. People refusing to get on stage to speak because there was debates about kind of, can you have a group that does Black writing? Does that mean that they're Black before working class? Same discussions were had about women. If we give women their own group, are they more feminist than they are working class? And all these kind of conversations. But they allowed space to have those conversations and discussions. And I think that was the thing that I quite liked about them. And because of that, you get under this umbrella of working classness all this diversity. And, there's conversations this kind of year has been a real talking point to start thinking about class again and what that means and the diversity within class. And it seemed to me that these people were having these conversations, in the late 70s when they started. They started in 1977 up until the kind of early 90s, when they unfortunately closed because the Bookplace building was taken over. So there's a couple of kind of theories as how the federation started, and then I'll go on to specifically the Peckham Publishing Project. But I think it's relevant to the way that all of these groups kind of worked and what they had in common. So some people say that groups like the Basement Writers in East London and Scotty Road Writers in Liverpool and these kind of groups kind of happened around the same time, and then they ended up kind of talking to each other and getting in touch because they were doing similar work and kind of sharing it. And then the federation kind of came afterwards to kind of support all these different groups. The other theory is that it kind of was kicked off by the work of Chris Searle. So you might already know this story, but for those who don't, I'll just kind of give you the key facts because it's a really inspiring story. Chris Searle, who's now quite a well-known academic educationalist, he was a teacher. Oh, that's that doorbell again. Was a teacher in Stepney, and he decided to publish the poetry of some of his school kids. Now, obviously, some of his school kids' experiences were quite diverse, and this is, I think, that time where kind of children-centered learning, is really important. He's coming at it from this kind of this thought about, children-centered and their experiences being very important. And he decides to publish the poetry of his school children, and some of this poetry is quite hard-hitting. It's maybe a bit sweary. It's experiences of abuse. It's experiences of growing up in the care system, of poverty. And he thought it was important to publish this work. And nowadays, kind of publishing children's poetry doesn't sound that radical, but it really was at the time. No one had really done this. And also, this was a C of E school, and the bishop really did not like the fact that this work had been published, and he got the sack. And in this picture, you can see the then quite famous school strike. So this is I won't read the sign because I cry every time, but this is a sign of the strike. The school kids came together to strike against him. And then Chris Searle was reinstated afterwards. This is a fantastic poem, just one of the poems that was written as part of that anthology by this Paul Richens guy. And if you want to know more about this, if this is kind of new to you, the link at the top here it's the 50th anniversary of this event, and History Acts, which are a great organisation that get together historians with activists, are doing a 50-year celebration. If it's in London, I'm not sure if it's recorded, you'd have to check, where Chris Searle will be there, as well as some of the former school children that are now all, poets and journalists and things. And not all kids that went to school in Stepney did. It really did have that much impact. And there will be some kind of poetry from children today. So definitely go if you want to learn more about that. And I think that the thing that kind of runs through these different groups that take part in the Federation, and definitely the Peckham Publishing Project too, it's that learning and education isn't like imbued onto you and then you have to change. It's that there's an understanding that you have that inside you already. You just need the opportunities and the platforms and kind people with different experiences to kind of help you craft that and get what is already inside you down in a way where you can communicate that to other people. And I think that way of working is something that runs true very much to the Peckham Publishing Project. So just I suppose a little bit on that. I mean, the Peckham Publishing Project, as part of the Federation, these were groups that were really aware of where they sit in terms of working class cultural production, working class writing, working class publishing historically. So there's a quote here that I've taken from a document that was written by members of the Federation about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, writing about their experience. And they quote Thomas Cooper, the poet and chartist, "Go ye and write likewise, all join hands and heads to create a library of your own." Like, they're coming at this knowing that they're part of this wider tradition and that they want to be part of that, and they're being inspired by the past to do that work today. And they also understand, like I said, the kind of power of publishing, what it is like to be represented, to see books, like actual books that someone's gone to the trouble of kind of writing and copying and printing and laying out, with people that look or sound or have experiences like you have in Peckham at that time, whether you're a working mother, whether you are someone who's just moved from the Caribbean, maybe you're an Irish worker living in the area. I think they understood that and the power of communicating those different stories. And having a bookplace, Peckham didn't have a bookshop, which was one of the reasons why Peckham Publishing Project started, very similar to Centerprise in Hackney. It didn't have a bookshop, and that was a problem. So before I go into Peckham exclusively, I kind of this was a quote again taken from that same publication, which if you want to know, I can find. I just can't remember the name of it right now. Which is the kind of founding members of the federation that kind of talk about this, about the way that they are working, the kind of ideology behind it. As I said, they're very sophisticated. They really know their stuff. They're coming at this with kind of hundreds of years of examples of working in this kind of way. And I think that it's something that just can't be reiterated enough about cultural institutions not being one-way conveyor belts. This isn't about people imparting knowledge onto other people. And maybe they don't always get it right. Not everyone does. But I liked this kind of quote here, and they're saying that cultural kind of matters, they're about negotiation, about contest, and about struggle. The Peckham Publishing Project and the Federation, you know, these were things that started off as conversations with the Workers' Educational Association, and they were saying, you know, oh, is this something that, you know, we can do? And they decided to go against that because they didn't want to be organised by outside people. However well the intention was, that's not what they wanted. They didn't want tutors coming in from different areas. They themselves wanted to do this work, wanted to decide what was being published, wanted to decide what kind of level of editorial control there should be over the works and things. So this is the Bookplace. This is what it looked like at the time. And like I said, it was a place where the Peckham Publishing Project was based, but it was also a bookshop because Peckham didn't have a bookshop. Peckham still doesn't have a bookshop. East Dulwich, which is the posh bit where I live, does have bookshops, and loads. But Peckham itself actually still doesn't have a bookshop. There was a guy, Peter, who had a bookstall recently, but there's so much development going on in Peckham now that he then got pushed out, and he now has a bookstall in East Dulwich. So this is, you know, still really relevant to today. So this is the Bookplace. This is what it looked like. It was a bookshop. It published stuff. It also did loads of different things from, childcare things. It had gigs. It had talks. It was a real kind of community space. And this is just some examples of things that were published by the Peckham Publishing Project. And I'll kind of refer in a bit more detail to some of these. So you've got experiences of migration. That's what So This Is England is. Irish, Vietnamese, Caribbean, African stories of coming to this country. Looking back, you get a lot of these kind of nostalgia ones. So looking back is very photographic, pictures of the area and how it's changed, but also there's quite a lot of memoirs, first person kind of experiences of growing up in the area. And then there's kind of collections like this writing by women in Peckham that kind of people have kind of grouped together and decided to publish collectively their experiences. Now I'm going to attempt a little audio because I was lucky enough recently to meet Dave Pearson, who was one of the initial staff members of the Peckham Publishing Project. There were a small amount of staff. They all got paid the same amount, so quite egalitarian in the way that they worked. And Dave is going to talk a little bit about funding and the way that they worked there, which if any of you have experience of funding will shock you at how kind of liberal and supportive funders were at the time. So hopefully this works. Lynette, would you maybe give me a thumbs up if you can hear it?
Technically my job was funded by the Arts Council of Great Britain. Our Literacy and Numeracy Fund, they paid a lot. I don't know if anything came from here.
And that's because they identified a need for like adults that needed extra literacy and numeracy, right?
There was a national campaign. It involved adverts on the telly.
Oh really? I didn't know that.
You want to check the adverts on the telly involved a couple of lorry drivers,
right,
van drivers. One of them was the actor Bob Hoskins.
Oh right.
Yeah, covering up for the fact that he couldn't read and write.
Yeah.
You know, so it was filling this form and he said, "Oh, I haven't got any glasses. Can you?" You know, all those excuses. And what you found is a lot of people that couldn't read and write were covered it up till their children went to school.
Right.
Then
they couldn't help them with their
homework. So then they
homework.
approach a literacy project.
Yeah.
And we were running that, a literacy and numeracy project I wasn't a qualified teacher, but or some people taught ESL.
That's what I did for a while.
And I did help with literacy, and I did help with numeracy, but because of the experience of working with Cambridge House Literacy Project, there's nothing better than actually publishing work by literacy students. So that's what we wanted to do. With those little books you saw, they were in red, I think. That was a pack of 6, as I remember, that Tanya Whitley put together. I must have set it up to be printed because I had this art college background. And then we did a collection of, then the writers group had a collection of poetry. I found a couple of them here. And then we did one of West Indian stories for Milk River.
Yes, I read that.
Oh, you seen that one?
Yeah.
I robbed all the pictures of that.
So that's Dave talking about his experience working at the Peckham Publishing Project. And I think Dave doesn't have a lot of those materials. He's not sure where they've gone. He didn't even know that they were at some of these archives and libraries and things like that. So it was quite a nice experience, I think, for Dave to know that some of that work that he did, people are looking and reading. And then he also brought lots of things that I'd never seen before either. So it was really nice to meet him. So the work of the Peckham Publishing Project, what they actually kind of published, they were very keen, and this is work that's going on today, and there's been a lot of conversations around representation with the kind of Black Lives Matter movement and stuff. They were very keen to show positive images and representations of local people, what actual local people looked like. So there's lots of images of people of colour as dentists, as nurses, as teachers, because they recognised that wasn't happening in the literature that was available. The way that they stocked the bookshop, this is all very similar to Centerprise, if you're aware of the work of Centerprise, because the Peckham Publishing Project and the Bookplace were kind of considered like a sister site. Tanya Whitley, who really kind of set it up, she was very much inspired by that. So there's a lot of text with positive representations of people in colour doing all these different roles and having responsibilities, and showing the diversity of kind of religion and experience. So you've got lots of images here to try and kind of write that. Some of the work that they did also was like going into school libraries and advising on kind of like how to diversify the kind of material that was available and things like that. So, I mean, all things that really we're doing today, but seem to have forgotten this kind of work that was done previously. They also, so you can see here, this was taken from some kind of leaflets. It's not an amazing scan, but they would do all these kind of adult education classes and rallies and fairs and things like that. I don't have a copy of it here actually, but they used to be a fair that happened in Dulwich, Bel Air Park in Dulwich, which is just down the road. And the Peckham Publishing Project had a stall, the Bookplace had a stall, and to encourage people to come to the Bookplace and learn about the kind of work that they do there. And the army had a stall there too that they were using for recruitment, and the Bookplace refused to go if the army had a stall, and they decided that they would do a protest, and they protested, got thousands of signatures. It was backed up by Labour councillors, and then the army refused to have a stall there. And so, I mean, there was some real kind of power behind the kind of work that they did, and they really, I think what they really had is they genuinely had these community connections, because it was a mutually beneficial relationship. They were giving something that these kind of communities and people saw the value of. This is a lovely calendar that Dave gifted to me actually. So they would have a calendar, they would raise some money, and then each month it also published some of the poetry that was published that was written throughout the year. So really lovely, and these are pictures taken inside the Bookplace of some of the kind of community work that they were doing. So I will kind of now spend the last kind of part just kind of delving into the kind of context of the work, really. So I Was a Walworth Boy is written by John Bennett. not a writer. He'd never written anything before, but you wouldn't know. It's beautifully written, and it's a kind of small memoir of growing up in Walworth. And it's a kind of real story of, he doesn't shy away from the poverty and the effect that that had on him, not just in his childhood, but actually throughout his whole life. So it really affects the relationship that he had with his wife. He came from a very poor family, but his wife, really, that was abject poverty that they grew up in, and he was scared to marry her and scared to have children because he was so scarred by those experiences that he didn't want to put that on anyone else in the future. And it's really, I think at the beginning, it's a really amazing, from a kind of historical perspective. These were people that were writing in the 70s and 80s. They were writing about their childhood experiences in the 1930s. So a lot of this is about like World War I, and then later in the 1930s, their kind of experience of economic hardship, which is something that we're kind of removed from now because it's not outside of living memory, those kind of World War I experiences. So it's really fascinating to read them. And John talks about his experience as a child on what the working week was like. And he explains Thursday being a mixed up sort of day, which I think is a really poetic way of expressing that by Thursday, you'd ran out of money and you'd ran out of food, but you knew Friday was coming along and you can pawn stuff, and then Friday you get paid. So it's this like cyclical nature of, yay, like Friday, money's in, we've got everything, and then running out, Thursday being this kind of like mixed up sort of day because hope's just around the corner, but you're really on your last legs with everything else. And yeah, it really doesn't shy away from the real kind of hardship experienced by him and other families on the street. On street, really, so this is just off the Old Kent Road. If you know this area, this is Page's Walk, just off the Old Kent Road, which is just down the road for East Street, which is where John was writing about, which has a famous market. Still a very working class area, lots of social housing. East Street Market is it's still quite a big market, big Latin American population nowadays. There's another kind of memoir book that's written, and this one has a section called the Grotto season. So this is kind of like a working class phenomenon where children would make grottos outside their house. I don't really know that. I've tried to look it up and I have never really found that much about it. The only thing that I know is that when I talk to other people, EastEnders that are older than me, that grew up in working class areas, they go, oh yeah, grottos, they know what it is. So this is the idea that you go outside your house, you collect little trinkets, stones, feathers, whatever you can find, and you make a little display, a grotto. And then if people like it, they come past on their way home from work and they drop you a penny, and it was a way to kind of make a couple of pennies that you can go spend on some sweets. There's a very sweet and moving story of a little girl, and it's grotto season. Everyone's very excited. And the guy who wrote this one actually writes in the third person. He writes about women and mothers and other children's experiences on the street. Obviously from his experience, but you're getting not just his personal view, you're getting an experience of the whole street. And she creates this grotto and she takes a picture off the shelf and doesn't really think much more of it. And it's a picture of her father who served in World War I and didn't come back. And she doesn't really think much of it. And the man walks past and says that he recognises the person in the picture and gives her, quite a bit of money. And she's overwhelmed. And then she takes the picture back inside and her mum talks to her about it. And it's the first time she really kind of recognises that she had a dad and that she's lost him in the war, and she'd never really kind of understood that before. A very kind of sad and moving story of what life was like as a child, really, at that time. And then you've got a really fantastic collection of stories about migrant experience in Peckham. So at the time, Peckham had a very big West Indian population. Nowadays, it's Peckham has a very large Nigerian population, but they didn't move here until the kind of 80s, early 90s. There is so this is England. There is a story by this lady Muriel, and it's called First Steps. And Muriel's husband has come over from Jamaica and settled here, set up a kind of flat and everything, and then told Muriel to join him. Muriel comes to London, and I mean, throughout all of the books, there's just this huge disappointment with what England is. And there's a really poetic part where it snows. Muriel's never seen snow before. She's not quite sure what to do. And she asks her husband, what do I do? And her husband says to step in the footprints that are already there and make your way that way. And it's a really kind of poetic way of saying you need to assimilate, really, and just kind of follow this track, this trodden path. And again, like I said, this kind of general sense of like real disillusionment. They're not really being prepared for the racism that they were going to face when they moved to London. That's something that runs throughout too. Which is an example of Hyacinth Durant, what she experiences being a single mum and trying to find housing in a really precarious area where there's signs here that says no coloureds, no children, having to deal with that. And then unfortunately, there's a really horrible experience where Hyacinth was brave enough to share that her son was murdered by a tenant while she was in hospital giving birth to her daughter. That's how unsafe the housing was. And the experience that some of these people, as part of the Peckham Publishing Project, were sharing and talking and communicating with others. And she just kind of finishes the story with, I felt rejected by society. It's just, really horrible. And that kind of association that's forced on that kind of population and the bad housing, really fuels that racism felt in the area. And then lastly, there is this collection of women's writing by women in Peckham, which is just fantastic. It starts very boldly with a poem directly addressed to the Prime Minister, Dear Maggie. And it is the women in the collection. Some of them are quite committed, kind of like trade unionists. They're quite politically involved. Politically might mean, getting on local councillors to like build a new park or create a mother's centre and things like that, but they're kind of aware, they're active of what they can do, they have agency in their local areas. There's a lot of kind of experiences of work and experience, and then there's a whole section on kind of like what women's place is today. This is, the Equal Pay Act is in 1979, so there's lots of kind of disillusionment really with the fact that they were very excited for the Equal Pay Act and then it's not really worked out for them. So Dear Maggie is the poem that opens up the collection, and you can see this disillusionment. They're not very happy with the kind of cuts to education, the cuts to training. The Equal Pay Act hasn't really worked out as they were kind of hoping, and the kind of privatisation that they're experiencing and going to experience in the future that they're very upset about. As someone who kind of looks at history and is using this as a kind of source to learn more about working class life, one of the amazing things that they did is they diarised women's days, which I think is really great. So this is Maria, and she's diarised in the times when she wakes up, where she takes the kids to school, when she has to pay the rent, when she talks to her friend. She pops around to her neighbours every day at about 4 o'clock for a cup of tea, and they have a chat, and then she's got to go and see her mum, and all this kind of stuff, really kind of showing the unpaid labour, a lot of it, that women are doing at the time, and that kind of double work thing that they talk about at the time, working for wages and then coming home and having to do unpaid work. So that is a kind of a run through of the kind of content there, and I suppose that this is just a kind of very rambly list of some of the conditions, I suppose, that created this kind of petri dish that made the Peckham Publishing Project happen. What happened to make it happen? And as you read through this list, you'll notice that it sounds exactly like today. And so I think that for me, that's why it resonated with me, because also I grew up, I was born in 1992. I didn't experience any of this, and I couldn't quite believe living in this area and then coming from Scunthorpe and seeing, like, in the Federation they're writing, there was some in Gould, Doncaster, Leeds, that these places ever existed, and that wouldn't, and that I really saw a need for it today. And that I would, really like that to happen. And that in this kind of period with COVID, we've seen the rise of like mutual aid, people seeing that people can come together, they don't have to rely on like outside or bigger institutions, that they have the power to do it themselves. I thought, oh, I wonder if this could be a positive out of this very extremely negative situation, that perhaps these loss of third spaces, like closures of pubs, closures of community centres and things like that, the racism that we're feeling, but also these hopeful things that about decentering white voices and, representation. Perhaps there's space for something like the Peckham Publishing Project again, and a need for that to happen. I mentioned a bit earlier that Peter had a stall in Peckham. Don't say that fast. And he then kind of got moved to East Dulwich. But Peter is very on board, knows the story of the Peckham Publishing Project, and is really keen to do something in the future. And so my kind of dream would be maybe to create the Peckham Publishing Project, even for a week, just temporarily, somewhere in the centre of Peckham, and see how that goes. This amazing bit of graffiti doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but it was in that same area where the Peckham Publishing Project was, and it made me think how true that was. Nowadays, it is a lovely African fabric shop, as you can see here on the right. So it's still well kept. It's still there, and I maybe temporarily could be turned into something else for the space of a week or something like that. And what I have done in the kind of meantime is use the inspiration of the Peckham Publishing Project really to kind of launch a community publishing project in the area that I work in. So I manage a project in Newington Green, which is Hackney Islington border. And it's all about the radical history and stories of that area. And so I worked with a couple of people to launch this community publishing project on the same kind of veins as Peckham Publishing Project. It's called Enzine because we're in N16. And we're just taking it to the printers now. And I think we had 14 contributions of kind of flash fiction, prose and poetry from local people around the theme of spaces and places. Could be real spaces or places, or could be imagined spaces and places. And so at least that's something that's kind of being done inspired by that work, I suppose. If you want to know a bit more about this, recently there's a journal, that's what the link is at the top, called Lumpen Journal, and it publishes working class and poor people's writing. And I was in the last edition with an article about working class lives in 1980s Peckham, based on this kind of research. So but also Lumpen Journal is wonderful and it's worth a read, or you could contribute if you like. But I think I'll end there and see if we've got any questions.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Amy. Yet again, we have another speaker on top of our game. Aren't we lucky, the people that we have who come to talk on such a range of topics, but all of which, yeah, as you've said, chime with today, and have things to tell us as we. And as I often say, it says explore the past, change the future on the window of our library. And there are so many ways in which that can be done. And you're certainly doing it, Amy, which is brilliant. Let me move on to a gallery view so I can see if anybody wants to wave at me to ask a question or to make a contribution, because I understand, oh yes, we've got some virtual applause going on here, Amy, which is great. But it was said that, yes, Peter is on the call, so on the Zoom. Peter, do you want to say anything? If I ask you to unmute, you don't have to, but you are welcome to if you would like to. Maybe not. You are also welcome to put something in the chat. We have got positives in the chat, but not actually any questions. Dave, here we are back with booksellers again. We're doing a mini theme, especially for you, Dave. Go for it.
Hi, thanks, Amy. That was really interesting. I love your enthusiasm about the topic. I'm engaged in researching into the radical book. I've been doing it for years, and I've only ever worked in the radical book trade, so I couldn't write about anything else. And I'd be interested if you'd let me contact you, perhaps via the library, to talk about any people who you know who worked in the shop. There's a group of 4 of us that set up a radical history book selling project, and we're in the process of producing our 3rd newsletter. You can get it via the website of Left on the Shelf, which is my business. So if you want to do that, you might find that useful. And there's actually a listing of every radical bookshop we've ever been able to trace in the country. So it's all part of that research. One little thing that I might just query you about is the WEA. And oh, by the way, I think the book you mentioned, the quotes, was it The Republic of Letters?
That's the one. Yeah.
Icomedia.
Yeah.
That, as far as I know, that's the only bit of writing about the Federation. I mean, if anyone comes across anything else, I'd be very interested. I am writing a bit of a chapter about that, so this I'd like to extend that a bit. The WEA, they come in for some stick in this book, but it's more the old version of the WEA, which was a bit paternalistic. But even then, in the 30s, for instance, the most famous WEA class ever was the Ashington Miners, which has produced reams of books, and the play about it by Lee Hall that came out about 10, 20 years ago. And the guy who led that was from a university, and he actually adapted his way of teaching so that the people who turned up, who were practically all miners, one was a clerk in the mine, so he still had links, but he was a bit more middle class, but all the rest were miners, and they decided on how the class would be run. And that's something that the WA did later on. It developed much more like that. And I think that the vast majority of members of the Federation, the publishing side of it, they all had links with the WEA, and it was very fruitful. I'd like to ask Susan, while I'm speaking, if she knows why the Yorkshire Arts Circus never joined the Federation.
Yeah, can you unmute yourself, Susan?
Yes, thank you. That is a fascinating question, and I've asked Ian Clayton, who was very involved with the Yorkshire Arts Circus, that question, and he didn't seem to really know. I think maybe he thought, or there was a feeling at the time, that the Writers' Federation was more oriented toward the south of England and London, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't really know. But yeah, I mean, there really was no explanation for that. The Yorkshire Arts Circus, I think they saw themselves as having a broader remit than writing, although they did produce a lot of writing. I have quite a few of the books that I've collected on various trips. But they had painters, and they produced some fantastic plays, one of which I was able to see in 1993. And so I don't know. I don't know. I think it's just some kind of accident of history, really.
Okay, thank you. We've got some interesting stuff in the chat. Susan has given us a link to an online archive. I was interested, Amy, in what you said about Syracuse University having digitized some stuff. I must follow that up. If you've got a link or anything you could whiz through to me, that would be great, because that sounds like something we should pick up on and potentially add to our catalogue, so that we can be pointing people towards things that we hold not in digitized form if they're available elsewhere. We are trying to do a lot more work on digitization, but it's we're never going to get there, of course. So if people have done it already, then that's always great, and we can point to them themselves. Natalie, thank you very much for providing a typically, Natalie, very thorough reference there to a journal article. So there's some work on worker writers from Tom Woodin. Amy, I'll forward you all the chat in case there's things there which you want to follow up later. So yeah, great. Thank you, contributors. Anne, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Amy, because actually we were in touch recently by email, because thanks to Peter, in fact, because I was hoping she'd be able to come and talk on a radical history walk I was involved in organising. But actually, having heard your talk, Amy, I think it deserves much more time than we would have been able to give it on that occasion. So hopefully we'll be able to be in touch, and we'll try and organise some, perhaps you could.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't do that. I'd be more than happy to. In fact, actually yesterday I haven't really done many of these talks, but they're never really in Peckham or to Peckham groups. And the other day I was thinking, yeah, I need to do something about that. And I was in touch with Chris Scales at Southwark. And I said to him, who should I be speaking to? Who should I be getting in touch with? So yeah, if I can be of any use, I would be.
Yeah. I think we should definitely be in touch. As the rest of you have gathered, I also live in the Peckham East Dulwich area. So although currently I'm actually in East Yorkshire, not too far away from, so we have quite a bit in common actually, Amy, both Northerners and living in London, in Peckham specifically. But yes, I've got a few ideas about how we can do things about hidden histories in the area. But anyway, that's not of interest perhaps so much to everybody else here. So we'll be in touch, I hope.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, we're delighted in Salford to be making links between people in Peckham. That's fantastic. That's last week we were making a link between someone in Florida and somebody in California. So yeah, it is it is our role to draw these networks together. Yeah, great. Anybody else have anything that they would like to add? No. Wow, I think you've said it all, Amy. That's great. You that is terrific. You are a natural. You should be talking to more people in Peckham, because you'd definitely be getting them all piling into that shop and turning it into a place of words as well as of material for as you say, even just for a week. That would be great, wouldn't it? Keep us posted on that, because that sounds fantastic. Okay, and yeah, if anyone knows more about Yorkshire Art Circus, there is Susan's email address for you. So
I think Gillian's got her hand up.
Oh, Gillian, I beg your pardon. Gillian, you have. I'm sorry. Do beg your pardon. Go for it.
It's all right. Very, very late to put my hand up. A brilliant talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You talked about the workers getting equal payment. Was it actually constituted as a cooperative?
Probably not, actually. Yeah, I don't think so. And they don't use that in any of their writing either. And I think that actually it's similar to kind of what Dave said about the WEA, actually. Like some, the experiences of some of the early people that were staff are quite integral to setting it up. One of them, for example, was Dulwich College, which is just down the road, which is that very exclusive boys' school that, all the MPs go to. One of them was a teacher there. Now, he was, I think, a communist, and was later, and was very, very left-wing and very well-intentioned. But a lot of the people from the early days of starting it up were very much kind of university educated, but wanting to genuinely try and help people in their local area. And then I think it becomes a little bit more led by the community a little bit later on.
Thanks.
Okay, that's Amy. That's Gillian, late of the Co-op Archive. That's and although retired, clearly retaining a strong interest in co-op, as we would expect, Gillian. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else with a late hand? I will be looking out properly. No. Okay. All right. Well, once again, very many thanks. I'll forward you the chats, as I say, Amy, because people have been really rightly appreciative of your time and your enthusiastic expertise. Cheers. So if you joined us late today, or if you want to recommend this talk to others, it has been recorded and we'll be uploading it to the library's YouTube channel as soon as we can. And there'll be a link on the event webpage to get you there. Next week's talk is again online only. On Wednesday, the 20th of October at 2 p.m. We'll be welcoming Peter John Files, who'll be beaming in from Sweden to talk on the SDF, the Social Democratic Federation in Lancashire, 1884 to 1918. Till then, best wishes to you all in solidarity from all at the Working Class Movement Library. Goodbye.